Chapter 1. The Starport Bazaar. The Starport Bazaar on Zephyria Prime was a cacophony of sights, sounds, and smells. Alien merchants hawked their wares from stalls that stretched as far as the eye could see, their voices blending into a symphony of commerce. The air was thick with the scent of exotic spices, the tang of ozone from malfunctioning tech, and the faint metallic undertone of the planet's atmosphere. Humans, Zorlax, Krillians, and a dozen other species mingled in the crowded marketplace, their faces illuminated by the neon glow of holographic advertisements. In the midst of this chaos, a small, hunched figure made her way through the throng. Her name was Lyra, and she was a Zorlak, a species known for their delicate, almost ethereal appearance. Her skin was a pale, shimmering blue, and her large, almond-shaped eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. She wore a tattered cloak that barely concealed her emaciated frame, and her movements were slow and deliberate, as if every step pained her. Lyra's heart raced as she approached a stall run by a human merchant. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that had seen too many years under the harsh light of alien suns. His stall was filled with an assortment of goods, spices, rare minerals, and even a few pieces of ancient technology. But it was the small, unassuming box on the counter that caught Lyra's attention. The box contained a rare medicinal herb, one that could cure the disease that was slowly killing her people. Lyra had been searching for it for months, and now, here it was within her reach. But there was one problem. She had no money. Chapter 2. The Bargain. Lyra approached the merchant, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the other customers on her, their gazes filled with curiosity and disdain. She ignored them, focusing instead on the human behind the counter. "I need that herb," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, it's a matter of life and death." The merchant raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "That herb is worth a fortune," he said, his voice cold and detached. "Do you have the credits to pay for it?" Lyra shook her head, her eyes downcast. "I have nothing," she admitted, "but I will do anything. Anything you ask. Just please, let me have the herb." The merchant studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he took in her frail form. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. "Anything," he repeated, his voice taking on a predatory edge. "Are you sure about that?" Lyra nodded, her heart sinking as she realized what he was implying. But she had no choice. Her people were dying, and she was willing to do whatever it took to save them. Chapter 3. The Agreement. The merchant led Lyra to a small, dimly lit room at the back of his stall. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with strange and exotic artifacts. Lyra's stomach churned as she realized what was about to happen, but she forced herself to remain calm. The merchant turned to her, his smile widening. "You're a brave one," he said, his voice dripping with false admiration. "Not many would be willing to make such a sacrifice." Lyra said nothing, her eyes fixed on the floor. She could feel the weight of the merchant's gaze on her, and it took all of her willpower not to shrink away. The merchant reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek. Lyra flinched, but she didn't pull away. She knew what was expected of her, and she was determined to see it through. "Very well," the merchant said, his voice low and husky. "The herb is yours. But remember, you belong to me now." Lyra nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She had saved her people, but at what cost? Chapter 4. The Consequences. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra found herself trapped in a nightmare. The merchant, whose name she learned was Garrick, treated her as little more than a possession. He forced her to work in his stall, serving customers and cleaning up after him. But that was the least of her worries. Garrick's true nature soon became apparent. He was a cruel and sadistic man, and he took pleasure in tormenting Lyra. He would mock her, belittle her, and sometimes, when the mood struck him, he would hurt her. Lyra endured it all, her spirit slowly breaking under the weight of her suffering. But even in her darkest moments, Lyra clung to the hope that she had done the right thing. Her people were safe, and that was all that mattered. Chapter 5: The Escape. One night, as Lyra lay on the cold, hard floor of Garrick's stall, she made a decision. She couldn't go on like this. She had to escape. Waiting until Garrick was asleep, Lyra crept out of the stall and into the bustling streets of the Starport Bazaar. The neon lights and the cacophony of sounds were overwhelming, but Lyra forced herself to focus. She had to get as far away from Garrick as possible. As she made her way through the crowd, Lyra's mind raced. She had no money, no friends, and no place to go. But she couldn't go back. She would rather die than return to Garrick. Chapter 6: The Ally. Just as Lyra was beginning to lose hope, she stumbled upon a small, hidden alleyway. At the end of the alley was a door, and above the door was a sign that read, "The Sanctuary." Lyra hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. Inside, she found a small, cozy room filled with other aliens, Zorlax, Krillians, and even a few humans. They were all sitting around a table, talking and laughing as if they hadn't a care in the world. At the head of the table was a tall, imposing figure. He was a Krillian with dark, scaly skin and piercing red eyes. But there was a kindness in his gaze that put Lyra at ease. "Welcome," the Krillian said, his voice deep and resonant. "You look like you've been through a lot. Come, sit down. You're safe here." Lyra hesitated for a moment, then took a seat at the table. As she looked around at the faces of the other aliens, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could start over. Chapter 7: The Plan. Over the next few days, Lyra learned more about the sanctuary and the people who ran it. The Krillian, whose name was Kale, was a former slave who had dedicated his life to helping others escape from their oppressors. The sanctuary was a safe haven for those who had nowhere else to go, and Kale and his team worked tirelessly to help them rebuild their lives. Lyra also learned that Kale had a plan to take down Garrick and others like him. He had been gathering information on the corrupt merchants who exploited the weak and vulnerable, and he was preparing to launch a coordinated attack on their operations. When Kale asked Lyra if she wanted to join them, she didn't hesitate. She had suffered at Garrick's hands, and she was determined to make him pay. Chapter 8: The Reckoning. The night of the attack, Lyra's heart was pounding in her chest. She had never been in a fight before, but she was ready to do whatever it took to bring Garrick down. As they approached Garrick's stall, Lyra could feel the tension in the air. Kale and his team moved with precision and purpose, their weapons at the ready. Lyra followed close behind, her hands trembling as she clutched the small knife Kale had given her. When they burst into the stall, Garrick was caught completely off guard. He tried to fight back, but he was no match for Kale and his team. Within minutes, the stall was in chaos, and Garrick was on the ground, his hands bound behind his back. Lyra stood over him, her knife poised to strike. For a moment, she considered ending his life then and there. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected: fear. In that moment, Lyra realized that she didn't want to be like Garrick. She didn't want to be consumed by hatred and revenge. She wanted to be better than that. With a deep breath, Lyra lowered her knife and stepped back. "Let the authorities deal with him," she said, her voice steady. "He's not worth it." Kale nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. "You're stronger than you think, Lyra," he said. "And you're right. Let's leave him to face justice." Chapter 9: The New Beginning. With Garrick in custody, Lyra felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had faced her demons and come out stronger on the other side. But she knew that her journey was far from over. Kale offered her a place at the sanctuary, and Lyra accepted. She spent the next few months helping others who had been through similar ordeals, using her own experiences to guide and support them. As time went on, Lyra found a sense of purpose and belonging that she had never known before. She had lost so much, but she had also gained something invaluable: her freedom. Chapter 10: The Legacy. Years later, Lyra stood at the edge of the Starport Bazaar, looking out at the bustling crowd. The sanctuary had grown into a powerful force for good, and Lyra had become one of its most respected leaders. As she watched the aliens and humans go about their business, Lyra felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. She had come a long way from the scared, desperate woman who had once offered herself to a cruel merchant in exchange for a cure. But Lyra knew that there was still much work to be done. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, and there were still many who suffered at the hands of the powerful and corrupt. With a determined smile, Lyra turned and walked back into the sanctuary, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had found her purpose, and she was determined to make a difference. And as she disappeared into the crowd, the neon lights of the Starport Bazaar flickered and danced, casting a warm, hopeful glow over the bustling marketplace.